This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Atom Audio, iZotope, Jay-Z Microphones, and Solid State Logic. You're hearing my voice right now on the Jay-Z V12 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100D mic pre and C610 complementer with iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. So please remember to check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes below. It's a great way to help support this show. And now, get ready to rock.
You kind of have to manage your overheads based on the drum kit. It's something that I've found for a more aggressive drummer when it's a really hard cymbal-driven song is to actually record them from the drummer perspective. So pull the mics back to the ear plane of the drummer.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio introduces the all-new A7V monitor with rotatable HPS waveguide for the accelerated ribbon tweeter and advanced onboard DSP-based room correction using the included A-Control software or optional SonarWorks software with a measurement mic, allowing you to tune your speakers for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. It's amazing that we can create professional mixes using a computer in our home studios, but trying to mix with a mouse, it's like trying to play the guitar with the tip of a pencil. It sucks. And why shouldn't you be able to mix as naturally as you play the guitar? That's why I upgraded my studio to include the SSL UF8 fader pack and UC1 channel strip controllers. They let me mix as fast as I can feel the music. Go put the fun back into your mixes at solidstatelogic.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Dave Schiffman, a Grammy winner and multi-platinum selling producer, mixer, and engineer who came up on the ranks as Rick Rubin's engineer. Together, they produced monster hits such as the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication, System of a Down's Toxicity, which reached #1 on Billboard, certified double platinum, and earned multiple awards and nominations. They also produced Hypnotize, which once again hit Billboard #1 and led the band to be the first ever rock outfit to have 2 #1 LPs in 1 year. Nice. Dave's production and mixes have topped the charts, recently with the Strumbellas Hope, from which the single Spirits hit #1 on the Billboard Alternative charts, took home the Juno Award for Single of the Year in 2016, received an iHeart Radio's Best New Artist nomination, and won Much Music's Best Alternative Video. That's awesome. Dave produced Pup's 2019 Morbid Stuff, which debuted again, #1 on multiple Billboard charts, including rock, Heatseekers, alternative, and independent albums. It also landed 14 on Billboard's Top 200 chart. The album went on to be shortlisted for the prestigious Canadian Juno Award for Album of the Year. Dave has also worked on Smashing Pumpkins' latest album, and The Killers' critically acclaimed LP Imploding The Mirage, Grammy Award-winning album Father of the Bride by Vampire Weekend, and Haim's Days Are Gone, which reached #2 on both the Billboard Top Rock and Alternative charts. Big shout out and thank you also to Kelly Musgrave Glansberg at Linear Management for making our introduction. Thank you again, Kelly. Please welcome Dave Schiffman to Recording Studio Rockstars. Dave, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm ready to rock. Hello, fellow rockers.
It's great to have you here, dude. It's really nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
What an incredible list of records you've worked on in the past. And then, of course, the stuff that is more recent just sounds amazing, sounds awesome. So it's fun to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about, in your own words, how you got started out in this, and maybe give us the brief version of, did you start out as a musician playing, and how'd you end up in the studio where you are today?
I actually started on this side of the glass. I came to it from recording studios in New York City. I was a runner / intern at a studio in Manhattan called Skyline Studios for about 3 or 4 years. I got promoted to assistant engineer there, and I was assistant there for about 2 years. And then I moved to LA, and I got a job as an assistant engineer at Ocean Way Recording, which was a world famous Class A recording studio.
Yeah. Is Skyline still existing?
No, the Skyline folded, but there is a studio there in its place, which, funny enough, is run by an ex-Skyline alumni named Pat Dillett. And
Skyline, didn't you have to take the elevators way up to Skyline?
Right. That's right. There was a 3rd floor and 6th floor, and Pat took over the 3rd floor.
When I interned at Woodland Studios here in Nashville, Sandy, whose last name is escaping me at the moment, sorry, Sandy, but she had come from Skyline and told me stories about it.
Sandy, she's in Washington now, I think. Sounded
like a cool place.
It was a great place to come up. They were very, what's a good word for it? They were very encouraging. They really wanted you to learn. There were days where the maintenance staff, the tech staff who built the studio and were both great engineers in their own right, would bring all the runners in and they'd have class. They'd teach us how to align a tape machine, how to set up mics on a drum kit, it's stuff, invaluable stuff. And I didn't go to school for this. It was always just an obsession. And it was really back in the 80s, it wasn't as easy to find schools that provide a great background for it.
I remember I started I went to school in 91, and there were a lot of schools, but it still seemed like it was kind of a new thing, like the 80s introduced it, right?
Yeah, there was one school in New York, and the name, I can't remember the name.
I think I visited it. I don't remember what it was called either, but they're proud of teaching you on an 8-track first, and it was very minimal.
Exactly. And there's something to that. Like, I worked my way up from tape to, where we are now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that education in recording to tape was great because it teaches you how to stay organized. Because on a 24-track, that's all you got. You got 24 tracks and you got to make it work. So you have to share tracks. So, your tambourine track might also have your background vocals on it, or it might have a solo guitar on it. You had to kind of figure out how to fill in the blanks and make it so that it all fit on that one piece of tape.
Do you remember treating tracks on tape with the thinking that it was going to always come up on that fader at that panning, and you just sort of chose the instrument? Or did you treat it where you were like, okay, every time we play this down, somebody has to flip, unmute the track depending on where we are, because that same tape's hitting it at a different time? It
would be more like that. It would be a little less organized than that, because back in those days when you mixed off a console, you could do something called cross-patch. So you could take, say you had a tambourine and a guitar solo on track 18. So you could mult out track 18 to input on the console like 23 and 24. And then you'd automate your mutes so that it would open on track 23 for the tambourine and mute. And then it would open on track 24 for the guitar solo and mute.
Yeah.
So that was the, I guess, comparatively the prehistoric method of doing it.
That was with timecode or not with timecode?
Well, it would be with timecode because the automation on the SSL or Neve, for that matter, ran from SMPTE timecode. Yeah.
Yeah. There goes track 24.
Exactly. So it's really a 23 track. And then you couldn't print too close to SMPTE. Well, you would have to
because it didn't sound all that great.
Well, you'd have some crosstalk, which you'd have to mind, and you'd have to, sometimes the SMPTE would be printed too loud, or it wouldn't be loud enough. And that's where, that box, the Distripalizer came out, which would, clean up your SMPTE on the way to wherever it needed to go. It was, all this stuff, which is completely useless now.
Yeah, yeah. But, do you remember, was there anybody that like flipped the script and actually took the sound of SMPTE and made it a musical part in a song?
Not off the top of my head, no, I can't. But I mean, that I guess you could like set up a trigger and have it come through, like with a drum or something, under a snare or something like that.
The only person that comes to mind for me would be Frank Zappa, just, introducing us to the word SMPTE. And a Society for Motion Picture and Television Engineers.
Right. Okay.
What was that in? Baby Snakes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, very cool. So sorry, I cut you off as you were kind of bringing your way to L.A.
So I made my way to L.A. in 1993 and started at Ocean Way, which was incredible. A great experience. Back then, Ocean Way had these very archaic tape machines made by Ampex, the ATR 124s, which sounded phenomenal. They were, they were flat down to 20 hertz, I think. They just really were brilliant sounding machines, but they punched horribly. So there would be this crazy delay going, not so much going in, but coming out. You would literally have to punch out on the and before the downbeat because it would take that long for the bias to go back down. It was crazy. And because of that, most of the engineers who came into the studio wouldn't want anything to do with running the tape machine because it was daunting. And
right, you wanted the assistant to have to do it.
Exactly. So, blessing and a curse. What was great was, as the assistant, you really became integral to the session. Yeah. And it was a lot of, just you and the person playing and working on the punches, getting the punch right and, that communication. And that was invaluable, not to mention, fun and, really pulled you in and made you part of the session. And that's, irreplaceable in terms of experience and just being around amazing talent like that. And that was the great thing about Ocean Way, was just the level of talent that would come into that studio every day. And, all sorts of music from, doing string dates for the Oscars to, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It was just all over the map. And I mean, who could ask for a better learning experience than that? It really was, in a sense, baptism by fire. You really had to learn your, can I say?
You can swear, yeah. It's a rock and roll show.
All right, there we go. All right, you really had to learn your shit, and you had to be on top of it, and you had to be organized, and it really forced you to think, a couple moves ahead. And I think the secret to being a great engineer is to be able to anticipate what your producer or what your artist needs, and to kind of have a whole plan kind of just kicking around your head before somebody says, well, we need to do percussion, or can we set up to do a horn overdub, or, oh, let's just get this one thing real quick. So you just need to have that Rolodex card up in your brain and be able to go, okay, I need a 414 and I need this, that, and whatever. Let's set that up and get that going. Or to jump out there and do it yourself, depending, I guess, on the situation.
Now, was the time that you were there, if I'm remembering this correctly, that's where Joseph Puig had a room for a long time, right? Was that,
yes.
Were you there just before that happened, or was that happening at the same time?
He was in Studio A. I think he took it over probably just as I was heading out the door, just as I was kind of starting to become a full-time with Rick Rubin.
Right.
Yeah. And So, yeah, so I saw that room kind of come into its development. That was quite a scene over there.
And that was the room that you would have been recording in a lot.
Actually, I didn't work in that room a lot. That was the room with Focusrite. And I think maybe over the course of I wasn't at Ocean Way very long. I was very lucky in that, after about a year and a half, I connected and started working for Rick. And awesome. I kind of was able to jump ship at that point. But
we definitely want to hear about that. So,
right.
Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, we've had Dana Nielsen was on the show before.
Oh, sure.
We talked a little bit. And then, of course, Jim Scott. Talked to him before, and that was fun.
Jim's awesome, yeah.
But, no, Rick has not come on the show yet. I'm surprised, but maybe one day.
Rick, a very enigmatic person.
Yeah. A funny aside, I'm clean shaven now as we talk. I look more like you than I used to. When I started the show for a long time, I had very long hair and a huge beard. And I would literally, I'd walk in, to the YMCA here in Nashville or just somewhere on the street and somebody would go like, hey, it's Rick Rubin. So Rick and I have that in common, I guess.
There you go. Dana was somebody that started under me actually on the System of a Down records, Hypnotize, Mesmerize. That's when he cut his teeth in the Rick camp. I actually kind of passed the torch to him because at that point I was heading out to produce a record in New York, I think. And I was like, all right, you got it. It's all you.
Nice.
And Jim Scott is amazing. I assisted him a lot at Ocean Way, and I learned a lot from him about, how to behave in the studio and how to, do everything from edit tape to, keep my mouth shut when I was supposed to keep my mouth shut. So great guy. And, he's very important in my career for sure.
Super nice guy. Well, so tell us a little bit about, that starting out when you were working with Rick, where did you guys work?
Well, it started in, I guess it was 1995. Rick was working on the, among other things, he was working on the Chili Peppers record, One Hot Minute, which was the follow-up to Blood, Sex, Sugar.
Yep.
And he had brought in Richard Dodd to work on it. Richard Dodd is based down in Nashville, a fantastic engineer in his own right and super nice guy.
Yeah, he's been on the show a couple of times. Super nice.
Oh, cool.
Very, very nice guy.
Brilliant guy. Really, really.
I've heard him really break down the Wildflower sessions that he did with Rick too, which was fun to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this was after the Wildflowers sessions. So Richard came out to LA to do vocals with Anthony. And at the same time, they, when Anthony wasn't available or, if he didn't come in for a day or so, Rick and George Trikulius as well would just keep throwing mixes at Richard. So they'd be like, here, mix this, here, mix that. Oh, we need a radio mix of Good to Be King. We need a couple mixes for this Jayhawks record. And so, Richard was happy to oblige. It was, it was fun. But after, I think, about a month of this, Richard, understandably, he got a little homesick. He really wanted to go back home. I think, he missed his family and, just wanted, needed to go home. And so he turns to me and he says, you want to take over? And I was like, yeah, of course. I said, are you down to recommend me? And he said, absolutely, sure. I was like, thank you, great. So I assume he does do that. And the next day or the day after that, another engineer shows up. An engineer, I think, who was based in Vancouver came down and he was going to take over for Richard. So I was like, okay, well, I'm sure he did his best. Well, whatever.
As we say in the studio, shit happens.
Exactly. I could not fault Richard for that, because I'm sure, if he told me he was going to do it, I'm sure he did it. So this other engineer shows up who shall remain nameless, comes in and, definitely had a bit of an attitude, definitely had like the big swinging dick attitude. Like I'm God's gift to engineering. And, at that point I dealt with all kinds, and, that's fine. Just stay out of his way, do your job, keep your mouth shut. So we're about to start recording, and I pull the remote over to me because, as I told you before, those ATRs, I would always just assume that I was running tape. I didn't want to even like throw it at somebody because it is pretty overwhelming. So I sit down, put the remote in front of me. He turns around and looks at me and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to run tape." He's like, "I don't need you to run tape." I said, "Okay, you want to do it?" And I turned the remote around and I said, "Let me just show you real quick how this remote works." Because it was an old plasma remote, okay? So it was moody and it was very inconsistent. So
I like it. At the time when a plasma TV would have been brand new, the plasma remote was old stuff.
It was terrible. So I was going to show him, I had like these little shortcuts written in, like, because you could save settings and stuff. And he looks at me, he goes, I can figure it out. He said, "I think I can figure out how to run a tape machine." And so I was like, "Okay, fine. It's all you." So I went to the back of the room, sat down on the couch, and dude proceeded to bury himself, because he would have a track in repro while the rest of the machine was in sync, or he would have 2 tracks in record. And this was just constant litany of fuck ups. Yeah. And, and he would, get all mad and he'd bark at me and I'd be like, "Yeah, no, you got to do this." And be like, "Get away from me." Blah, just really just stepped in it deep and, would not ask for help. And so I had no choice but to just watch him kind of bury himself. So understandably, the next day he did not show up. I think
nice.
I think
it only
he
took
was
1 day.
yeah, I think he was asked to thank you but no thanks. And so there I was sitting in a studio all by myself. Anthony wasn't available at that point, or for whatever reason. And but I knew that there was still some stuff that had to be mixed. Like Richard had left, and there was still I think a couple of Jayhawks tracks that needed to be mixed.
If you've ever wondered how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars, it's because I've been cheating by using iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing on my voice RX breath control, D-click, D-clip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from iZotope. Check out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars, or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record up to 2 terabytes over USB-C with speeds of up to more than 1 gigabyte per second, transfer your tracks in a flash, and take your samples and sessions with you to the studio or stage. The OWC Envoy Pro Electron is your waterproof, dustproof, and crush-proof SSD that you can rely on. Use our custom link in the show notes to help support this podcast at macsales.com/rockstars. What was that? What were the Jayhawks? What record?
It was Tomorrow the Greengrass, I think, was the record.
Man. What a classic.
Yeah. That was like either their first or second record with American. I think it was maybe their second. But so I pulled out the song that had to be mixed and I just started to mix it. And, just took a couple hours, did my thing. And Rick was actually working in 2 other rooms at the same time. He was down the hall we were in Studio 3 at Ocean Way. He was down the hall in Studio 2 also with Danzig. And he was around the corner in another studio called Louis Clubhouse with another artist, and I forget who it was. So I knew he'd be in at some point. So made my mix, printed it to a cassette. That's right, a cassette.
If I recall, that was a big deal Dana brought up. He said, always have a cassette to take home or something after the session, or am I misremembering that?
Oh, no, yeah, sure. I mean, that was before you could burn a CD. Yeah. So it was the next best thing. You'd burn rough mixes to take home.
So your thinking here was you wanted to make sure this was something that could be taken home and enjoyed outside of the studio.
Actually, I burned the cassette because I was going to give it to Rick when I saw him. So I saw him walking down the hall, walking past the studio, and I was like, hey, had the studio, you guys had the studio booked, there's nothing going on. So I mixed this Jayhawks track that I knew you needed done. If you want to use it, please take it. And he said, all right, well, he said, come down to Studio 2 and bring a cassette and play it for me. And I was like, great, okay. So went down, popped the cassette in, held my breath, played it. And he said, I listened to the whole mix, he stopped it. He's like, cool, all right, thanks for that. And that was kind of the end of it. Like, yeah. I left, no ifs and, no like anything after that. And then I guess about 2 or 3 hours later, his assistant called me. Her name was Mala, was his assistant at that point. So Mala calls me and she said, Rick wants to know if you're available tomorrow to do vocals with Anthony, but you guys are going to the Sound Factory instead of staying at Ocean Way. Is that okay? And I was like, that's fine. Sure. And she said, okay. So it's tomorrow at Sound Factory at like 9 p.m. I'm like, great. And that was the beginning.
That's awesome.
And that went on for about 10 years, I guess.
Let me interject, if you don't mind, a couple of questions while we're here before we move on. So the experience of playing your mix for somebody and holding your breath, that's something that I think we can all understand, because it might be that we're playing a mix for a client. It might be that we just recorded one of our own songs and we're playing for somebody else. But that is a real, like, I did a mix class here, and one of the students sat there and we were listening to his mix in front of the classroom, and he described it as like having to sit and watch somebody else make out with his wife. I was like, that really kind of sums it up. It's a really unnerving feeling,
It's very, honestly, it still is. I mean, 30 years later, I still hate standing in the room with somebody playing something back, because, all I hear is stuff where I was like, oh, should that have been louder? Is that is there too much reverb on that? And that just starts blowing my brain up. So it's almost better when I just send somebody the mix and then wait for the feedback, which is also stressful in its own right. But to have somebody standing there with you it's intimidating. Right,
because if you're not careful, you're going to start saying something out loud during the mix, even like, oh, that little part right there, I'll do that.
Right. Oh, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. Yeah, you really just have to like bite your tongue and just wait for the response.
What do you do? Do you stand to the back part of the room? Do you have, give somebody the chair up in the sweet spot and say,
yeah. I get out of the way. Now anyway, I get out of the way. I say, hit the space bar. It's ready to go. There's your volume control if you want more or less. And I'll be right back here. And I go and I stand off.
I'll be in the parking lot taking off in my car.
Exactly. So I just stand off to the side, and it's interesting to like gauge their reaction at certain parts of the song, and you can kind of get a feel for whether you're going to get 3 pages of notes or 3 comments or none.
How do you feel about pages of notes? I did a record I produced, worked with Jamie Tate here, and he was mixing. and he played the song down for me, and I just scribbled down all my notes and handed them to him.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying like, whoa, nobody ever hands me this many notes. And I thought, he wasn't like pissed about it or anything. I think he maybe even appreciated it, but I was like, well, I kind of figured you'd rather just me give you everything I had to say right away than, back and forth or whatever.
Notes are critical, because at the end of the day, the idea is to make your client, the artist happy, and you can't read somebody's mind. And, sometimes there's you might take an approach that is different from what the artist maybe had in their head. And it's not necessarily bad. It's just different, oh, wow, my vocal's really dry on this. Like, okay, did you want more reverb?
That's because I'm working with Rick Rubin.
Exactly. And a lot of times, well, I don't want to say a lot of times, but, there have been many instances where somebody will listen to the mix and they'll be a little taken back by how different it sounds, different but not different. It's kind of like the covers have been pulled off it, and it's, there's a bit more to it, and there's a bit more, you're hearing like a lot more detail than you were.
Like maybe it's more exposed, more vulnerable.
Right. And I think sometimes that throws people off initially, and I'll get a lot of, oh, wow, I need to get used to this for a second. And I get it, because when you've been living with a mix a certain way, a rough mix, you're, they don't call it demoitis for nothing. You get notched into how something sounds. And as soon as it's different, the first thing you think is that's wrong. And I do the same. I'm guilty of the same thing with mastering. Like something comes back from mastering and my immediate reaction is, oh, this is all wrong. What did they do? And then, I let it simmer for 24 hours, 48 hours, come back to it and be like, oh, okay, that's really not so bad. That's really a lot closer than I thought. And
so what are some other things that you've learned where you've connected the dots between somebody else giving you the notes and you giving somebody else the notes when you switch roles?
I think what I try and do is not personalize it. And that's what I try and let my bands know, or artists, is I'm not really interested in who's making the note. I don't care that the drummer wants to hear more snare, or that the guitar player wants to hear more of the the solo louder or whatever. I want to be sure that this note is coming from the band, and the band has decided we'd like to hear more snare. That feels more like we're working towards the same thing. Whereas when it says, well, the drummer wants more snare, okay, well, how do you guys feel about that? Does that make sense for the song? What are we talking about here? That's an important part, because I think, your artists need to all be on the same page, or at least close to being on the same page. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a mess of a mix.
Have you found a way to preemptively unify the band so that you're getting the right kind of message?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I'll say to them. I'll say, I'm not interested in who's giving me the notes. I'm interested in the notes from the band. So everybody who needs to weigh in should listen. You guys make all your notes, and then you cobble them all together and make sure you don't have notes that are counter each other. Because every once in a while you get that where somebody will say, snare's too loud, and then way down the line it'll say snare's too soft. So it's like, well, let's make a decision here, And so that always helps. And I think at the end of the day, most bands are really appreciative of that, because it forces them to really kind of, sit down and go, okay, what do we think about this? And, then they're talking to each other instead of listening in their own little world, and I think that's important.
What about the process of actually getting the notes to you? Some of these questions I'm asking might be relevant in a different kind of a situation. Maybe if you have people coming into the room with you, or if there's more person-to-person contact, these are irrelevant questions. Some people might, be getting all their information through a text message or an email or a comment.
My preference is to have the notes written down because then there is no gray about it. I'm able to process it better when it's written down. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with the artist before the notes, but I'll always say at the end, like, hey, you know what would really help me is if you could just write down the stuff that you want. And I'll make my notes as well, but I like it better when they write it because that way they're really thinking about what they're sending me.
Right, they're choosing the words carefully too.
Right, and it's not my interpretation of what they're saying. And I think that helps both ends. And the other thing that really grinds my gears is when you get a note that says the snare doesn't sound good or the snare sounds wrong. Like vague notes like that help nobody.
Right.
Because, or if they say, do you like the way the snare sounds? It's like, well, I sent it to you like that, so I guess I must like it. Like what, that's obviously you don't. What is it you don't like about it?
Yeah.
And, a lot of times you get feedback, well, I'm not very technical. It's like, you don't need to be technical. It's like, if you don't like the way it sounds, tell me what you don't like and let me come up with a different approach. Because to just tell me you don't like the way the snare sounds, that doesn't help me help you.
Maybe they think that you have a like button that you can just press.
I don't have a plug-in for that. I'm sorry.
Do you find that people tend to reference your own discography with notes for what they'd like their stuff to sound like, or are they more likely to reference stuff that's completely outside of a record you've worked on?
It's a toss-up. Like I'll get a note sometimes. Oh, we really liked what you did with the background vocals in this song. Could we take a similar approach? Something like that. And, that's usually pretty helpful depending on how old a song it is, because I might not remember what the hell I did. My process is always evolving. I'm always trying new stuff or, a new plugin comes in or whatever. So it's hard to sometimes know exactly what I did if it was a mix from like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, for sure.
But
even the methods with which we save things for the future, that changes.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about timestamping notes? Do you ever find that's helpful? Do you have a system where people can actually tell you exactly at this part of a song?
Yeah, I encourage people to give me times. And what works even better is bars, because that way, that's easy to get around a song. It's like, right. 4 bars into the first chorus, there's this hook that happens. Yeah. Can we bring that up?
Right, because then you don't have to match the time start of the song playing back as an MP3 to the Pro Tools session time start. That
can get really old. But, it's part of the drill. I'm used to it at this point. But there is a company called Samply, I think.
Yeah.
And they've figured out a way to do this. They have a way that you can mark in real time. And I think you can do it on SoundCloud as well, but I don't put stuff up on SoundCloud.
No. I wanted to like SoundCloud a lot, but there was just so much goofy stuff going on over there that I never really adopted it. But Samply is great. I use them all the time. In fact,
oh, you do? Okay.
They're very likely a sponsor on this very episode.
There you go.
So it's a good connection.
Samply, let's talk.
Yeah. What's fun about that? I'll make sure you get to talk to them too if you don't already know those guys. But what's cool about it is you can make a project, you can upload stuff, you can make it not downloadable. If somebody's listening to the mix that you upload, it streams at high resolution for them, right, so they hear it. Which, maybe you want to make comments about that, but that's one of those things that we didn't always know. It's like, it doesn't play sounding right when you play it right off the Dropbox link.
Oh my God, yeah. That's one of the notes I send to everybody when I send a mix. Do not listen from Dropbox, because Dropbox might be playing it back at 8-bit for all I know.
Right.
So I'm like, please download it, please. Yeah. And I've had a couple of things where, you know, a band comes back to me and they're like, well, we're hearing like little crackles and distortion in the vocal. I'm like, really? Okay, let me check it out. And I'll listen to the mix here and it's clean. And there was a point, you know, where we got on like a FaceTime and I was like, all right, this is kind of freaking me out because I'm not hearing it here. So let's go through it and figure out what the problem is. And we could not, I just couldn't figure out what it was. And then we hung up and I texted him. I was like, hey, by the way, you are downloading these mixes, right? Because the mixes were at 96K. I was like, you are downloading these, right? And he writes back, he's like, no. I was like,
I just press play.
I said, do me a favor, download the mix now and see if that distortion stuff goes away. And sure enough, it was gone.
Yeah. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One Reaper, or whatever you're using. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. The JZ Microphone Vintage series are built by hand in Latvia, featuring the patented Golden Drop capsule design for enhanced clarity that will give your recordings that classic vintage tone. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ V12 mic. Our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer only available to Recording Studio Rockstars listeners, so use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the V67, V47, and V12 microphones. Go to jzmic.com and get your vintage mic now. You know, I think that in all fairness, simple Dropbox links can be still very useful for a lot of musical decisions. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, it really is important to know that you're hearing what you're supposed to be hearing.
Right.
So, of course, back to sampling for one last sec, it will stream at the right resolution, and then you can press stop and you can drop in a comment and that's right in that spot, or it's just like a comment on the whole thing. And I guess one other really cool feature is if you then print you can go through the comments and then check them off as you hit them with another mix version, and then you can upload a new version of the mix right onto the same song. So now there's like embedded versions, almost like playlists in Pro Tools.
Wow!
So that's kind of handy, you know.
That's brilliant. I had played around with it a couple months ago, and I got distracted and stopped. And they did reach out to me with an email because they saw that I had signed up. Yeah. And I think they do that with everybody. You know, if you have any questions, let us know. And I just got distracted and moved on to something else. But it is a really good idea, and it definitely is better than the Dropbox situation. I'm just kind of notched for Dropbox right now, unfortunately. Like, all my stuff is up there. They kind of have me prisoner at this point.
I know.
You know, so
that's because you got one of those business accounts once upon a time, and now everything's there. And it's too big to fail. Isn't that what they say?
Exactly. It's like, take it all down. Where am I going to put it? You know? Yeah. So
awesome. All right. Well, let me see here. Let me jump forward. So I do like to ask, before we get to our halfway point, I do like to ask guests sometimes to share either an inspirational quote or just ask you, like, when you were getting started in all this stuff, you know, in the 90s, was there anybody that really inspired you at that time? Was there anybody that really made you want to make records?
I think what inspired me, and this may sound a little ass backwards, is the people who would tell me I couldn't do it. And I had a lot of that coming in, where I would get, you're too short, or there's too much math. Actually, somebody told me I was too short to be a recording engineer. Yeah.
You can't see over the glass.
Yeah. There's a lot of math in it. there's a lot of science. How's your electrical engineering experience? All of this stuff. And it was just, one kind of like, beat me down, beat me down, beat me down, beat me down. And all that did was make me more resilient and more like, well, I'm going to fucking show you and I'm going to do it anyway. And I think that was the best inspiration I could have had, because all it was me just trying to prove these people and to myself that, no, you don't need that stuff. You need a passion. And that's what it takes first and foremost, is a passion to want to do it and to make it, let's face it, to make it your life. I mean, people ask me what my hobbies are and I laugh at them because I'm like, who has hobbies? Yeah, who has time for hobbies? Who does hobbies? This is it. If you told me I couldn't do this anymore, I don't know what I'd do. So yeah. I think that's the kind of dedication, you need to put into anything that you want to do. Yeah. And I think from that, success is the residue of luck, or luck is the residue of hard work. Oh, right. Hard work is the residue. Luck is the residue of hard work. There it is.
There it is. All right. Awesome. Yeah. That's one of the tips that I remember learning in even starting a podcast like this, which now I'm realizing even as we're talking about it, it's the same thing that applies to making records and doing music, is because you kind of have to choose this because you love it so much. It's all you'd want to do, because you absolutely without fail will hit something that's such a pain in the ass that you just want to quit. But because you love doing it so much and because you're so interested in it, you'll get through that stage,
Right. And I think when I was coming up, home recording didn't really exist, not at the level just it does now. Track. Right. And so
guided by voices, that kind of stuff.
Right. And so getting into it and getting into a studio, you were set up to fail, because they would just make it so miserable for you as a runner. And kind of that was the first test. It's like, if you can put up with this shit, well, then you can probably put up with the next level of shit. And you also learn how to be somebody that that you can sit in the room with for 12 hours, because that's a big part of it too. It's like, if you're not a good hang and you're not, easygoing and willing to, roll with it, people aren't going to want to work with you. Yeah. That's definitely part of it, where you need to be flexible and you need to be, down for the project. And those are the things that I learned coming up from being in absolutely shitty situations, cleaning toilets and getting people food and making coffee, doing all that crap. But when I was doing it, always in the back of my head, I would just be like, okay, this is all for a reason. This is all for a reason. Okay, it's fine. It's fine, And I definitely got to the point where I was like, well, if something doesn't happen in the next year, well, then I tried and I'm going to have to look for something else. I got there, but fortunately something happened. There was a break, and yeah.
How long did it take you to remember to return with the receipt for lunch?
Well, yeah, I mean, Skyline, they were pretty strict about that. So they really beat it into you, not physically, obviously, but they really beat you over the head about that. You had to have your petty cash ledger spot on, or they were going to come down on you.
Yeah, because then they were losing money.
Well, exactly. And it's like they had to have it all laid out so that they could submit the bill to the record company. Yeah. So learning how to, master the petty cash, that was key back then. And that was a good learning experience, because it taught me how to keep track of my own money, because at that point I was like 22 or something, and, kind of clueless.
Right. So back then, petty cash was like a fortune at 22.
Yeah. I mean, there would be like $200 in the petty cash envelope, so you could get people their food or take cabs or, whatever you needed it for. But you had to go back and you had to put that in the ledger and subtract it and, that whole accounting thing.
Okay, I'm going to rewind again and ask you one more question about you describing the process of being an assistant, having another engineer come in and not really gel with you as the assistant. Obviously, that worked out well for you. But what about flipping the script there a little bit? As an engineer now yourself and producer, and you've gone in and worked with many assistants, what have you found to be like the most effective way to take advantage of all the help that you're given,
I think what's important for a good assistant is somebody who's there, who's into learning and who is into doing what they're doing, isn't there as a job. And because I can't believe people would actually do this for a living if it isn't what they wanted to do. Because, it's pretty thankless at the end of the day. Right. And you could make more money working at Starbucks, I'm sure.
You get health benefits anyway, right?
Right, exactly. And so I think when you have an assistant who, makes themselves part of the session and makes themselves available and is there to offer suggestions, not in an overbearing kind of way, but I'm always down at, like, if I'm working in a room I've never worked in before, I'll turn to the assistant and go, okay, where do you put the drums? What do you like for the drums? Or, okay, what mics do you have for overheads? What are you guys using here these days for overheads? Because it's always, I find it useful to kind of see what people are using in that room, because you have to figure that people who are working in a decent studio have a decent, that they're going to be decent engineers themselves.
Yeah.
That's the hope anyway.
Yeah. I like to ask musicians that come in sometimes, like, where do you like the sound that you get the best on this upright bass?
Sure. Yeah.
Stuff like that,
I always ask, which F hole is better?
Yeah.
Or, how's this for distance? Is this going to get in your way? Can I get it a little closer? It's a tube mic, are you partial to tube or ribbon? Because there's some string players out there, especially cello and violin, who will be partial to a ribbon mic, because ribbon mic definitely, like, you're getting a little less resin.
It's a different thing.
Yeah, a little less honky. It's a little smoother.
Yeah.
And a little less detail. But, it's a sound. So
I'll take a moment and say I was kind of proud of myself as an assistant in the first studio I was at, because a guest engineer came in to make a record with a young band that were friends of mine. So I was feeling like you. I was feeling a little jealous that I wasn't the one getting asked to do some stuff.
Right.
And the guy came in and he wasn't a dick, but he was cocky. He was like, he came in with some confidence and strolled through the place. And I decided that I was just going, I don't even know how I decided, but I told him, I said, I'm here to help you out. My job is to make you look incredible, like make you look like the best producer and engineer ever. So,
right.
I'm just here for you. Mm-hmm. And later he came back, we became friends, and he was like, man, I really appreciated it when you said that. You made it so much easier to show up in a strange studio. So maybe that's a helpful thing to even just communicate as an assistant to another engineer.
I think it is, because it just kind of sets the tone. And I tried to do that as well when I was an assistant. I would offer up an idea, but if I did, I would say it to the engineer, not in front of the producer or the clients or anything. I would, it would be, because, I don't want to step on toes, but if I saw something that I was like, oh, that might not be what he really wants, I would just, kind of pull him aside or whisper in his ear, hey, is that mic on the other, is the left overhead, is that okay? Or should we readjust that?
You didn't yell it across the drum floor. Hey, is this right mic you put up here?
Yeah, or just try to catch something that might happen before it does. And I think that's that's what a good assistant does. Like you said, you have the engineer's back and you make it so that they have a good experience and they walk out going, God, I love this studio, and, you're not getting a kickback from it or anything, but it's important that, that way that engineer is going to think about you differently from that point forward, so that's potentially somebody who might hire you when he's producing or might refer you out for a job, for a job that he can't do.
Awesome.
I mean, that's, kind of looking like down the road.
Awesome.
Got to always look down the road.
For 15 years, I recorded hundreds of bands like Jack White, Adele, and the Black Keys in my hay bale studio at the Bonnaroo Festival. I had to work fast and deliver finished mixes to the radio DJs within an hour, so I chose to use the solid-state Logic AWS 948 Plus for my mixing console. There's just no substitute for mixing on a real console. Until now, that is. SSL brings you the UF8 and UC1 controllers so that you can recreate the feel and speed of mixing on a console with the flexibility of mixing on your computer in your home studio. Paired with the SSL Channel Strip 2 and 4000B plugins, you can now get a world-class sound using real faders and real knobs to mix as fast as your ears will guide you. Levels, panning, EQ, and compression, they're all built right into the controllers. So go put the feeling back into your mixes at solidstatelogic.com. Adam Audio introduces the new A7V monitor for home and pro studios, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. The all-new A-series line of monitors delivers the same highly accurate, transparent sound and unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design that has made Adam Audio famous for over a decade, but now introduces new innovations such as the rotatable high-frequency propagation system waveguide, allowing the XART tweeter to disperse sound with controlled consistency, and DSP-based room correction and speaker voicings. Using the A-Control software or SonarWorks and a measurement mic, you can now integrate advanced filters directly onto the DSP on board the speaker to help compensate for imperfect room acoustics without introducing annoying latency or requiring plugins. This allows you to tune your monitors for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want to meet your ever-evolving studio needs. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at adamaudio.com. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show, aka I still don't know what to call it. But my guest today is Dave Schiffman, joining us from Los Angeles. We're going to jump in and continue talking about Rick Rubin, and working with Red Hot Chili Peppers and System of a Down, and we're going to get into mixing in Atmos and Dave's new room. So, Dave, you ready to jam?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, awesome. Actually, we probably said enough things about Rick. Rick, you're awesome. But what I would like to ask you, though, is you mentioned recording Anthony's vocals, and I wanted to ask you, what can you share about how those vocals were recorded? Because they really, all the songs in particular on Californication have this forward quality to them. And they just, somehow they sound a little bit louder than
they're a lot louder.
Yeah.
They're really loud. That was a big bone of contention when that record came out because,
really?
It was so loud it was distorting. There's a lot of digital distortion in it, and there were complaints. People were complaining about it. So there was actually an attempt to remaster it quieter, and didn't sound as good. So they were like, "Fuck it, just leave it." And it is. I mean, if you're listening to the mixes, they're pretty mono. I mean, everything is pretty much coming right up the middle.
Well, I guess you get the advantage of the same sounds coming out of both speakers, so it's louder.
Right, exactly. It makes it twice as loud. But
yeah, that's fascinating. Well, tell us a little bit about recording Anthony Kiedis's vocals.
Well, back then, Anthony just sang through an SM7, And as a matter of fact, the SM7 I'm talking to you on is the one I used.
That's why your voice sounds so good.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, there really wasn't much to it. It was an SM7 through, probably like a Neve 1073 and an 1176 for some compression. And then it was all Anthony, just doing his thing. And,
I'll interject this one point because we're engineers and we know what can happen. So Rockstars, Dave is recording his voice and he's going to send it to me afterwards. So I'm not hearing the SM7 yet, but you'll hear the SM7. But if you hear this and it doesn't sound like an SM7, that means that the internet gods refuse to deliver the file later.
Exactly.
But I think it's going to work out. So you're going to be hearing the SM7. That's it. That was my interjection.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that was really all there was to mixing, to recording his vocal. Mm-hmm. It really wasn't a complex thing. And I think in general, I'm more interested in a straight ahead approach to recording vocals like that, because I feel like there less things can go wrong, less, I see people using 2 or 3 compressors and a bunch of different EQ. And a lot of times I end up recording vocals flat, with some compression, but I feel like I'll start looking for different mics if I don't feel like it's the right vocal sound. Or I might try a different compressor or something like that before I start getting in there and carving. It just sounds better to me than doing a hyped up EQ setting. And what I'll do now is I'll send the singer a more hyped up version of it. I'll put it through some EQ and maybe some limiting. And, if they like some effects on their vocal, I'll send that to them, and I make it, pretty compressed so they can really hear themselves. But I wouldn't record it like that to tape or to Pro Tools, just because I think then you're kind of recording yourself into a corner. You've really limited what you can do to the vocal at that point.
Yeah. So what were some ways that you would recommend we do that? Would it be to do minimal, like the least amount of compression on the way into Pro Tools, but then use plugins as part of a send to the vocalist's headphones?
I think it doesn't have to be a minimal amount of compression, but it shouldn't be too compressed is my approach anyway, is to make it so that it's a solid, technically good recording. You've got like a decent level going to tape. It's something that you can manipulate when you mix, and it is appropriate for the song. So a lot of that is then picking the right microphone to go with the singer. Mm-hmm. So I'll do something of a shootout when it's somebody I've never worked with before, where I'll pick out 3 or 4 different mics, and we'll sing like the first verse and chorus or something. Or we'll sing like the loud part, and we'll sing a little of the quiet part, and just see which mics seem to translate best. Mm-hmm. And usually within a course of about 30 seconds, you know which the right mic is. Sometimes it'll be close though, it'll be pretty close, but I'd say 9.5 times out of 10, I'm usually on the same page as the singer when they walk in and they listen.
Yeah. And you find that, I'll do this similar thing. Sometimes I put too many mics up out there. Sometimes I probably feel like I should probably narrow it down a little myself.
A little press conference.
Although I've been surprised. I've had singers choose a mic that I never would have chosen.
Really?
Yeah. But do you find that it's really helpful that the singer sort of immediately knows that they like a certain mic, even in the headphones?
I think that's crucial, because if somebody's singing and they don't like the way they sound in the earphones, it's really hard to focus on singing.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, that sounds weird. That sounds weird. That's all they're thinking about is how weird their vocal sounds. So it's really important that a singer feels comfortable with what their voice sounds like in their earphones.
Yeah. Serj Tankian, System of a Down, those vocals really leapt out to me. That whole hearing, I forgot what was which song I'm thinking of. It was the single that was just like, I don't know, just the quality of it. I guess it was Chop Suey.
Chop Suey, yeah.
Yeah, that like the in-your-faceness of that what you guys did on that is really remarkable.
That really was the song. That's really the band. I mean, the band is in your face.
Yeah,
and that's was the approach for the recording of all the instruments. And when it came to Serj, I think we ended up on a C12 for his vocals, maybe an SM7 for some of the like the louder, more screamy parts. But again, Serj is a super dynamic singer, and it was what he did that made this vocal sound great.
Right.
Because, he knew how to work the microphone. And that's a key part to a great singer, is somebody who knows, okay, this is going to be loud, so I'm going to pull off just a little bit, or I'm going to turn to the side just a little bit. And, oh, this is a really quiet part. I'm going to move in. I'm going to get a little tighter on it. When a singer is aware like that, it only makes things better.
Yeah.
Because not that you're doing anything, not that I would do anything different because of that, but when a singer can do that, it makes the compression work nicer. It makes the microphone sound better, and it just makes the vocal sit in the track better.
Well, what you guys did was remarkable on that production too, because the kind of chaos inside the music, because of the way you guys didn't crowd it out with effects, the spaces are so just powerful. The quiet moments.
Absolutely.
In the song,
the silence around the notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and go ahead.
That's something that I've learned in my career is it's not about how many guitars you have on a track to make it sound big. It's about having the right guitars on there to make it sound big, and the arrangement and the key of the song. It's like all those things come into play, because if all your guitars are in the same frequency range and they're all doing the same thing, then they're all going to be fighting for space. So it's about creating that space. It's about having a guitar on one side going through one amp, and maybe a different guitar going through a different amp on the other side, and maybe a different tuning. Maybe it's an open tuning on one side, or maybe it's a capo tuning on one side, just to get that difference. And when you can hear that split with the double, that's when you're creating bigness, you're creating space. That was something that really became apparent to me with a band called Airborne. I did that with a producer named Bob Marlette, who's an amazing producer and engineer in his own right. And we were recording that at his place. And we would get the first rhythm guitar track down, and then we would listen to the double sound and find the right double sound that made the track open instead of close. And so we would go through different amps, we'd pick up different guitars, we'd try a different tuning or a different voicing. And all that stuff was really like an eye-opener into how to really like get things to sit right in the track.
Well, it's cool to hear you say that. I mean, that's a very guitar-centric or guitarist-centric comment, talking about that stuff coming from you. When you began this, saying you really didn't start out as the musician, you went straight into the this side of the glass. So what does that mean to you? Do you feel like you've learned a great deal about musicianship through your engineering and production? Or I guess before the production experience,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say I didn't have any musical background. I did, I played piano for like 10 years and I played trumpet. So I have a musical background. I never played with a band. Okay. So I do have like a background in theory and in understanding, like I can communicate musically, sort of, I would say.
Do you find yourself offering the actual open tuning and where to put the capo and all those kind of things?
Sure, yeah. And this is all from from experience and from like learning this from other people, like learning it from guitar players or from guitar techs. It's just me having that opportunity to like learn from people who do this stuff has been, immeasurable. It's fantastic. And to be able to pass that on to bands that I'm working with or artists I'm working with, things like Nashville tuning, for example.
Yeah.
Which is really great in heavier music, believe it or not, because when you want that kind of that fairy dust, that sprinkle on top guitar sound, the best way to do it is Nashville tuning.
For power chords even?
For power chords, for whatever. I mean, like, it's something that just opens up and extends the range of the guitar in a really cool way. And it's been a go-to on a lot of records for me. And
that's awesome.
On heavier records, especially almost. It just kind of sits in there in this really cool way. It doesn't sound too country, I know, because the term Nashville tuning may feel country. And it came from country music. I think that was a trick they would do to make it sound like a 12-string and just this big, huge, lush 12-string. And that sounds great as well. I mean, that's beautiful.
It's also a great final destination for that acoustic guitar where the action just gets out of hand and you can't really use it anymore.
Exactly. For that old box piece of shit guitar, you just string it up with the 12-string, the 6 12-string strings, and it's really a super cool thing to put in there.
Yeah. The OWC Envoy Pro Electron is your super fast and rugged pocket-sized portable USB-C SSD that keeps your music safe in the studio or on the stage. With storage of up to 2 terabytes and speeds of up to more than 1 gigabyte per second, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crush-proof, so there's no need to worry about your music anymore. Find the new Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars and use the custom link below in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. There's a lot of junk that needs to get cleaned up in a podcast or music mix. Boomy pops on the microphones, piercing sibilants, background noise, harshness, distortion, wild dynamics, and EQ correction. And all this editing and mixing cleanup would be impossibly time-consuming were it not for the magic of iZotope RX, Ozone, and Neutron. iZotope gives you a collection of plugins for mixing in your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with set it and forget it simplicity. Check out the new Repair Assistant plugin to help you find the perfect mix prep settings for any instrument. And the standalone RX app includes new features like text transcription and multiple speaker recognition for easy editing and navigation. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Well, that's cool. And that encourages me because I did take one of my electrics and string it up as a high string, Nashville tuning.
Yeah.
And then I never quite was sure where to use it now. But now when I do a heavy song, I'm just going to like blast it through some distortion and see what we get.
I would definitely try it. It just gives it just gives you air. It gives you the top strings in this really nice, like doubling way, but it doesn't get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got more questions around vocals because the Strumbellas Spirits, which is one that I believe you recorded, produced, and mixed.
That's right.
That project, right?
Yeah.
So those are great vocals, and that's really the other end of what we were just talking about too. Because in this case, you do want room. You do want. I didn't think of it as effect so much as like space around the vocals.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you want to talk about getting some of those great gang chorus vocals and the approach to recording those guys.
Oh, yeah. That's something that band is exceptionally good at, is the gang vocal thing. And we were doing that. We made that record in this little tiny studio up in Toronto called Lincoln County Social Club. A guy by the name of John Dinsmore owns it. And really cool vibe. Just, it's like the ground floor of his house and the control room was in the basement. And what I did was I set up, I think it was like a 414 or something. And we got everybody behind it and, hit it with a decent amount of compression. And they just went for it. And they do the part. We double it. Sometimes we triple it, to the point where it just felt like a big, huge vocal. And then we'd they'd sing another part. We'd double it. Sometimes we triple it. And that just created this massive background vocal sound.
And how many is everybody?
Well, there are 5 people in the band, I believe.
That's a lot.
So it would be all 5 of them, and sometimes the manager would join in too. So,
nice.
So it would be, and for gang vocals, the more the merrier. It always sounds better when it's more voices, and and they shouldn't line up perfectly because that's what makes it feel like a gang vocal.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes you can make that stuff sound too neat. And
that's a lesson you learn
away.
in the percussion and drum world too.
Sure.
You do those doubling of tom parts and stuff like that. And you realize that you're like, oh, when they're all lined up, it doesn't sound like more than one tom drum.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And then did you say things like, hey guys, I figured out a way to press record and then I'll run in there and join you?
No, not for background vocals, but I'm a big clapper.
Nice.
I clap on just about every record I do because I've got meaty paws, I like to say.
Teach us some clapping tricks. How do we get the best sounding claps?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different styles you can do. You can do like the palm, where you're more like palmed clap, right? And then there's the flatter one, more like that. And then there's that's probably it. It's those two, but I always have a lot of fun doing the clap tracks. It's great where there's like 2 or 3 of you around a mic, and I get to be on the other side of the glass and kind of it's a great perspective to like put on those earphones that everybody else has been listening on for the whole record. You're like, oh my God, this sounds like shit, or whatever.
It's insanely loud.
Yeah, like how do you listen like this? Oh my God. But so claps are always fun, and I try and whenever there's a clap track for a song, I always try and get myself on it. So,
well, and another question is, like how many claps is the right amount of claps? And I remember zooming in on a clap sample once and discovering that clap samples are literally 3 claps. It's like you need that magic number for it to sound like a clap.
Right.
So probably like all the hip hop claps and, programmed drum claps that you hear that just sound classic. I'm guessing if we zoomed in on it, you'd be like, oh, it's 1, 2, 3,
And a lot of those for electronic anyway are like 808 and the 707 claps.
Yeah.
Which are their own thing. They definitely sound cool. And it's cool to like blend that in sometimes with real claps. Like for depending on the song and depending on what's needed, like, you know, like 3 or 4 tracks of claps really kind of makes it feel more like, you know, people clapping. But sometimes it's really just about one clap, you know, the sound of not one hand clapping, but the sound of one person clapping.
Right.
And again, it really depends on the song and kind of what works right.
Yeah, and another thing rock stars to check out is really experiment with claps in the room where you hear the sound of the room versus claps that are very dead.
Yeah.
Like, or even gated, you know, you can even gate the claps and get really cool effects.
Yeah, it's like, and a clap is a super transient sound. So you really have to find like the sweet spot against the microphone, because if you're too close, all you're going to get is a tack, and it's not going to sound like a clap. If you're too far away, then you're not going to get a tack. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot where it sounds, you know, complete.
I've always found that I really enjoy my Coles 4038 when it comes time to percussion and hand claps and stuff.
Ribbon mic is always a great standby for all that stuff. Yeah.
I guess ribbons just manage the transient somehow. Maybe they're I think of them as having this great frequency response, but I'm going to guess that they're probably slower in movement than a condenser.
I think you're right. And I think, you know, they have a tendency to kind of shave off the top. You know, they're not as full spectrum. And you really don't need full spectrum for something like claps. Honestly, you don't need full spectrum for a lot of stuff. I mean, that's been the bane of digital recording is that, you know, just because you can record from 20 hertz to 20K doesn't mean you should. And a lot of times I'll find myself rolling top end off of things to get them to fit into the track better or to make it so that they read better. You know, like too clear on top sometimes works against you. When you have a whole bunch of things that are in that same frequency range, then they all kind of start to fight each other.
Yeah, well, I got some more questions in a moment about drums that we'll start addressing that topic. But I feel like a good lesson or a good exercise for us is to go to the art museum. So when you go look at paintings on the wall, you know, and you begin to notice that, especially in modern art, you know, it's like I picture these, you know, paintings that are maybe just a variety of shades of white, for example, or something like that. And you just start to see people express themselves through the visual art form, where it's like, oh yeah, there isn't a full spectrum on every single, you know, element of this painting. Why should there be a full spectrum on every element of a recording, an audio recording? So when it comes to drums, one of the things, again, to talk about System of a Down or pop, you know, these the many bands you're working with, you know, I guess a challenge can be stuff that has bold cymbals in the drums.
Yes.
And I wondered if you wanted to talk about some of the ways that you like to allow a drummer to have that intensity, but make sure that the cymbals aren't creating a problem in the recording and that they're finding just that right spot, you know?
That is a huge challenge. And, you know, a lot of that, again, and you hear me kind of going back to this a lot, but a lot of it has to do with the drummer and how they hit the cymbals. There are great drummers out there who are able to make the cymbals sound intense without beating the shit out of them. And that's, you know, that takes time to accomplish, but, you know, better drummers are able to pull that off. But when you have somebody who doesn't quite have that control, you kind of have to search for the right place for the overheads. And that's usually the most challenging part to me recording drums is finding the right overheads, finding the right position for the overheads, because sometimes, you know, a stereo left-right over the top of the drums just doesn't work. It just sounds stilted because of the kit layout, like because there's a lot of cymbals to the right and there's only one to the left, and that's the loudest one of all of them. So you kind of have to manage your overheads based on the drum kit. So something that I've found for a more aggressive drummer when it's a really like hard cymbal-driven song is to actually record them from the drummer perspective. So pull the mics back to the ear side, the ear plane of the drummer.
As long as the click track's not cranking up too loud in the headphones, right?
Right, but if you use ribbons, they're figure eight and you can cancel out the middle. So that seems to work really well because you get a little less of the bash and a bit more of the splay, I guess, for lack of a better word.
So let's break that down just a little bit more. So the drummer's sitting at the kit.
Yeah.
What kind of kit are you picturing in your head right now? Is it
like a 2-rack, 1 floor, like a 3-piece?
Okay.
And, maybe like a crash to the left, crash to the right, ride, and then maybe an auxiliary crash like a...
Is it a China?
Oh, I hope not. China cymbals
or an ice bell.
Those are the bane of my existence, China cymbals.
Did we invent those in the 80s?
I don't know, but very rarely do I hear one I like. I think the only China cymbal I ever heard that made sense was the drummer from Avenged Sevenfold, Jimmy. He knew how to use it. Like he used it in a really like perfect way. It just did it. It accented right. He hit it right. And I didn't even think about it twice, but then I've worked with other bands where, I go out there and I'll be like, let me place that China cymbal for you. And I take it and I pull it 5 feet away from the drum kit. I'm like, there, if you can hit it there, you can use it.
You can use it.
But only as a joke, of course. But
right. Yeah. All right. So we can picture the kit now in front of us.
Yeah.
Drummer sitting on the drum stool. Describe a little bit more about where these 2 ribbons would go.
So these 2 ribbons would be drummer perspective, left and right, about maybe, depending on how tall the drummer is, I guess, like 6 inches above the drummer's head on either side of him, angled slightly down. And there you have it.
And you want the rejection zone of the figure 8 to be aiming at the headphones on the drummer's head so that it's rejecting the click track if there is one.
Right. I mean, hopefully you have, the drummer's wearing earphones that are isolating and you don't have that issue. But, it's something to check for, and if that is an issue, well, then you got to look for another place to put the overhead mics.
Do you find more drummers coming in with in-ear monitors these days?
Yeah, I see that a lot more than in the past, for sure.
Yeah. Every studio needs a good vintage mic for that classic warm sound. Whether you're looking for those airy highs, sweet mid-range, or silky low-end, a good vintage mic can put the magic in your mixes. So it's no wonder vintage mics have been loved and praised by thousands of engineers for decades. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia using only the best electronic components and feature the patented Golden Drop capsule design for great detail and richness of tone that will bring that classic vintage vibe to your studio and be a real workhorse for your sessions. This time, our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer only available to you, rock stars. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the Vintage Series mics V67, V47, and V12, the mic you're hearing right now, at jzmic.com. Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mix Master Bundle to get great mixes using simple free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. All right, I'll keep blazing forward because there's so many things I want to ask you, and I got too many questions. But on that topic of drums, and on that topic, particularly listening to some of the different records that you've got, to click or not to click, how do you feel about that?
You know, a lot of it really depends on the music, on the style, and the ultimate, you know, what you're trying to get the record to sound like. You know, it requires a conversation with the band, because I've had bands who've said, you know, we really want to do this without a click. And my response is always, great, awesome. Here's what we all need to keep in mind if we are going to do it without a click. We can't fly anything. It's going to be a challenge to edit between takes, to drop something. Like if you want to drop a bar in here, it may not line up right. You know, you have all of these situations which may or may not become a factor depending on the quality of the musicianship and depending on ultimately what you're going for in the song. Sometimes it's worked great. I think when you have a band that knows how to play together live, it can work really well. But there's just a commitment there that if you're going to do that, things are going to swim a little bit, and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Do you recall whether records like Red Hot Chili Peppers and System of a Down would have been... Not to click?
No.
That's cool stuff to hear.
Chad didn't play to a click. And I mean, Chad's a ridiculous drummer. I mean, like, I could edit between Chad's takes and you couldn't hear the difference. I mean, he's solid. And the system stuff, you know, was so complex with so many tempo changes and, you know, all over the place that I just think a click would have been more of a distraction. And I think John, again, was able to hold his own and to keep it all, you know, locked in pretty good.
Come on, Dave. Weren't you supposed to be a master of the conductor ruler in Pro Tools?
And the thing that you can do now, and which I've done on occasion, is put the click track in after, where you make a tempo map to the drums.
The yeah.
And that works really good, because then you get kind of a live feel, but it's a consistent live feel. So everybody is, you know, slightly speeding up or slightly slowing down. And when you get that going, it just feels like a great live band.
Drum fills and clicks.
Yeah.
The sort of classic thing where the verse is in the pocket with the click, but sometimes you go to the chorus and you feel like everybody's having to slow down a little bit to stay on. Mm-hmm. Is that what thoughts do you have about that, or do you have any ways to approach that? Do you recognize as what I just said as a thing even?
Well, my experience is usually the chorus speeds up, especially when it's coming out of a fill, because there's that, you know, the drummer gets a little excited and he immediately starts to push, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, that's what they do live. So to have that little push in the chorus isn't a bad thing, as long as they are able to pull it back when they come into the verse.
Right.
Or into the next section. Just so everybody is aware of that, then it's awesome. But if you have a band that isn't quite able to focus like that, then it starts to get a little too messy. So,
are there any techniques that help us allow the drum fill to speed up naturally, but keep the song on a click?
I think you just ignore where it is on the click if it feels good. And he manages, they, I should say, and they manage to get back on the downbeat in a, graceful way.
Yeah.
Then who cares if if the fill's on the click? If it feels good, it feels good. The thing to bear in mind is when you're listening back, nobody else is listening to it with the click track. So it's best to listen to it without the click track and see if it makes sense.
It's like, what's that expression? Nobody ever left you walked out whistling the sound of the console.
Exactly. And that's it's a good thing to remember is listen to the drums without the click and see if it's still the same impact. See if it still feels as on. Because sometimes, the click can kind of fool your ears a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you kind of let the click be like your backbeat and be like, oh yeah, that feels great. But then when you take it out, you kind of feel that uneasiness in the snare or the wandering of the downbeat or the backbeat.
Yeah.
And that's something you need to pay attention to, because while it might more or less feel on the click, it might feel, not as consistent as you might want it to be, or as confident as you might want it to be.
Do you have an internal compass that says, okay, the drums are now solid enough that we can move forward with overdubs?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that I do. That, it's from having conversations with the band or the artist and making sure that we're heading in the right direction, that we're on the same page. Like you can always, I mean, with technology today, that's kind of the double-edged sword, is you can always make something sound perfect. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it sounds great, though. So being able to have restraint when you're editing your drum tracks, or for anything for that matter, to not make it perfect, to let it have that, that feel where it moves a little bit, that's part of it. That's important. And again, it's very music and music style related.
Yeah, because I was going to say, sometimes I just find that your perspective about what you think about it just keeps, sometimes you just notice like my perspective just keeps shifting, and then you're like, all right, it's time to move on.
Right. Like, yeah, I mean, you can really go down a rabbit hole. Yeah. And, if you're doing a song that maybe is, a bit more dance oriented, well, then the drums have to be super on and super locked. And then I'll go in and make sure that that's the case. But if it's a band and it's a rock track and it's, kind of jammy or whatever, well, I'm not going to go in there and make the drums feel perfect, because that just doesn't go along with the style of the music.
It would actually detract from the music potentially.
Right. It just makes it sound cold and sterile. There's no beauty in perfection really anymore. It's the bumps and warts that give a track personality. Yeah. But it's being able to decide, okay, well, that's fine, but that isn't. Like, this we have to fix. This, I don't really need to fix that. But this, I got to fix this. And it's being able to differentiate.
Back to that idea, it's a good thing we love music. to keep hammering away at these things forever.
Yeah, I was going to say, not always.
Well, so before we run out of time, as I promised, I want to talk a little bit about your new studio and what you got going on there, because you've done some remarkable stuff. First of all, tell us about your studio. I think you have a new Atmos room. Is that right? And then what are you surrounded by?
Yeah, I built this room in my garage in like 2008, kind of as an answer to a business that was starting to shrink immensely. Budgets were getting chopped left and right. Bands were getting dropped left and right. It was really, a bad time. I call it the culling because, I think it was Capitol Records basically went in and cut their entire roster like overnight.
Wow.
So at that point, budgets just shrank to nothing. Like back when I started, like the average budget for a new band, first record on a label, was, around $150,000, $175,000, and it went from that to, $25,000 almost overnight. So,
yeah, I've heard stories saying that what used to be the catering budget for a record became the entire budget for the record.
If you're lucky, and so that was the reason my studio came into being, because, when your mix budget shrinks by, 90%, well, you got to figure out a way to put some of it in your pocket,
Yeah.
So I got with a studio builder who was also kind of pushing his way into the private studio market, because it seemed like a foregone conclusion at that point that this was the way it was going. And if you didn't have your own room, well, you were either super rich and successful or you weren't going to work anymore. So
you didn't want to be super rich and successful?
Well, sure, but I wasn't at the time, or I guess I could say.
Sound like you're describing a choice.
Yeah, well, as if, right? So we designed this room, and it literally is like a clubhouse in my garage. It is my garage. It's about 400 square feet, and there's a couple of ISO booths that for a guitar amp only or something like that. I would never put a person in them because they're super claustrophobic. And and so now I do almost, I would say 99% of my mixing here. And occasionally I'll do vocals here, or I'll do some overdubs, but not a lot anymore. It
looks like you have diffusers on the back wall behind you.
I do. I have a Helmholtz, a massive Helmholtz filter is my back wall. And what that does is it makes my room what's called a one-pass room. So nothing reflects back. It all gets sucked into that filter.
Oh, cool.
So it makes my room really tight and pretty warm. And what I find is pretty accurate. I'm at a point now where I don't do car checks. I don't have more than one pair of speakers. It's like, I just know it.
Well, it takes too long to drive a car in LA.
Well, yeah, that. And I just find it confusing, whereas if I'm working on the same pair of monitors in the same environments and I send a mix out and somebody says, we want more bass, I know what they mean. I don't have to interpret that to a bunch of different speakers. I can do it on my speakers, and then, I'll check on my iPhone. Like I'll play it on the phone speakers, or I'll check it on earbuds or something as my.
What's your favorite way to what the mechanics of checking it on your iPhone? Do you just send it over there and then play the file off the iPhone, or do you have a different way of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll either email myself a link for that listen to, which is great.
Yeah, audio movers.
Yeah, audio movers. That works great. Or I'll drop it onto my iCloud and grab it from there on my phone.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system one from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free." And if I understand, I'm getting ahead of myself, but when it comes to Atmos, which I think is something you're setting up now, is that right?
It's set up, yeah. I've been doing Atmos for a couple of months now.
So the iCloud file is the way to hear.
Yes.
Maybe Vance was saying this. It's the way to hear the proper interpretation of the Atmos mix.
Right. I mean, the only way to hear Atmos back if you don't have iTunes, and also like you can't just drop a MP4 into iTunes and it'll play back. It won't. So the only way to do it is you compress a file, put it into, and send somebody a link to it. They have to download the file. It's an MP4. Download the MP4 into your files folder on your phone, and it will play Atmos from there. An MP4
with
version.
binaural in the earbuds, right?
Well, binaural's a different file.
Okay.
The MP4 is Atmos only. So but you can burn a binaural file as well, which you can listen to on any earphones you like, actually. But the MP4, you have to listen on the earbuds or something else that will play back Atmos.
Okay. Well, tell us what you're excited about when it comes to Atmos.
Well, I think what I'm excited about is having a three-dimensional workspace, which is something you really have to wrap your head around at first. It's a little daunting, but when you start to play around with it and you start to see the possibilities and how you can make something completely immersive. I mean, that is a word I've never really found myself saying for mixing before, where you can basically have it so you're sitting in something, and it just makes for a completely different experience. I think we're still in very early stages. I think there's a serious lack of consumer products that will play back Atmos. And I don't think Apple has done a great job of educating the public, because more people than not have no idea what I'm talking about when I say Atmos. So that needs to change. There needs to be more of an education of the public, and there needs to be more products that will give you Atmos playback.
Right. I think most consumers just see that their phone is telling them to listen to this new version of the song, and they go listen to it.
Right. And
maybe it says it's a little wider, and they go, "Oh yeah."
Yeah. It's slowly starting to make its way. I think, maybe we're 3 to 5 years off from becoming a bit more of a normalcy, I guess. And I think the other thing that needs to happen is that the Atmos mix needs to be its own thing. Like right now, it's very critical because of they want to keep the same ISRC code, which is the code that shows how many streams you get on a song. They want to use the same ISRC code, as I understand it. So your mix, the Atmos mix, has to match up identically in the amount of time. So it has to basically phase out with the stereo mix. And the other thing that they're asking for is they're asking for it to feel a lot like the stereo mix. They want to be able to go back and forth without it being too drastic.
It's probably because they're still remixing oldies.
Well, I think it's because they don't want it to jar people where they have their Atmos on and they're like, oh my God, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Atmos needs to have its own code.
Right.
So you can go, okay, this is the Atmos mix. And I think that will open the door for creativity in such a way where you're not emboldened to the 2-track mix.
Before we sort of disappear here, what are a couple of elements of mixing an Atmos where you feel like, wow, when now I approach this instrument in this way in an Atmos mix because it's different, or it's like a whole new space? I mean, I think of reverbs going behind you. I've heard people talk about the kick drum maybe needing to be duplicated in other speakers for dance things, stuff like that. I
think what the 3 of the things that I've found that are pretty effective is having, like, if you have drum ambience mics, having them behind you. And if there's drum effects, having them behind you. And it just makes the drum image stretch so you're in it. And that's really nice. Another thing is for the kick drum, I'll pull the kick drum. If I have a separate track for the kick drum, which is nice, I'll try and pull that more to the center, like literally like the center of the room, and feed it to the sub as well. And that gives it, that makes it just kind of feel like it's coming out of all the speakers, like you said. Yeah. And I'll do the same thing with the bass because, since the bass is a less focused frequency, I think you can get away with that. And it just fills up your bottom end a lot more in a cooler way, I think. Yeah. And there is no bus compression. So you have to mix without bus compression.
There isn't, or there just isn't yet?
Well, I guess there isn't yet, but if you do it, you're doing it after the fact in the Atmos assembler. Like there is like a limiter in there, and that's a pretty new plug. That's a pretty new piece of software, but I'm finding it to be great to use after the fact because there's EQ and there's limiting on it. So if you're trying to match it just a little bit more, or, you have that ability.
That's cool. I wonder if we're going to start recording vocals with like 4 more room mics that, go to the Atmos speakers and stuff like that.
I mean, I think production will start thinking in 3D. If people aren't already, I think that's going to be something you're going to have to take into consideration on your setup, like your room mics, and are you recording ambience, like you said, for vocals or guitars or for anything? Are you going to be adding more ambience to your records?
Yeah. Cool stuff. Anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted me to ask you?
I don't think so. I think.
All right. Well, I have a sort of a closing question for you as we wrap up. This one I like to ask all our guests. It's hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Okay.
And you get to go back in time and find young Dave. And I guess you're in New York, and I guess you're, it's the 80s or something like that. And you say, listen, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice, dude. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you want to go back and give yourself if you could?
That's a good one.
That's good advice.
I would say don't be afraid of technology and embrace it and try and be on the cutting edge as much as you can. I came to the digital recording probably a little bit later than a lot of people did. And I think had I had the opportunity or the desire to get into that earlier, I should have. And I also should have bought a lot more vintage gear than I did.
Yeah, right.
I would have bought
sold it.
Yeah. I would have bought, 5 more 1176s and a whole bunch of tube mics and a
Back
Neve
when they were
console.
$200 each.
Exactly. I mean, like now it's just ridiculous how expensive it's all gotten. But
what was the, in your experience, what was the cheap BCM 10 that came across your radar that you didn't get?
I actually did get a cheap BCM 10.
Nice.
Years ago, me and another guy bought a BCM 10 from Brigham Young University.
Wow.
I want to say in like 1996.
For choral recordings or something, yeah.
Yeah, for whatever. But like we got it for, based on today's prices for practically nothing. And it was clean. Like it hadn't, no smoking in the room, because it's Brigham Young. So it was in beautiful shape. So at the end of the day, me and this guy ended up splitting the mic pre's. He took 5, I took 5, and I think we sold the console off to somebody.
So Rockstars, if you don't know the BCM10, that's the Neve console full of 1073 mic pre's, which you probably have heard of.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, so Dave, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us, man. What a pleasure to meet you and hang out. And I look forward to meeting you in person. And I guess I don't think we met before. Passing.
I don't know that we have. There's actually a good chance I'm going to be down your way early next year for a record. So
cool. Well, please come by and have a coffee. I've got a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus system. It's only 2 speakers though. No, and 2 subs in the corners.
Oh, there you go.
But it really does sound great.
Cool. All right.
Thanks so much for hanging with us. Where should the rock stars go if they want to learn more about you? Check out your website. What if they're ready to produce, record, and mix their next hit record?
Well, you can always reach me, believe it or not, through Instagram. You can go my IG, which is just Dave Schiffman, or you can get me on Facebook, again, which is Dave Schiffman. Or I do have a website, and it's daveschiffmanmusic.com. So
awesome.
Those are 3 good places to get me. And, I try and answer everybody who inquires. So don't be shy.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to meeting you in person. We'll see you around the studio.
Me too. My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Cheers, man. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, JZ Microphones, Atom Audio, Solid State Logic, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription for access to many plugins. At jzmic.com, use the code ROCKSTAR for 40% off the V47, V67, and V12 microphones. That's what you're hearing my voice on right now. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio, and they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.